What's up, everybody? How y'all doing? Ooh, seems I need to fix my green screen a little bit. Give me a second, everybody. Go to there. Not one thing, it's another. Alright, sorry about that, everybody. We'll get started here now. I don't know what the hell's going on with my setup. Placed the light in this room with a different light, so everything's all kind of jacked up here. Didn't have problems last week, but I had problems this week with it. You know how it goes with green screens and shit. Anyways, welcome to another episode of the Crowdsourced Politics News Roundup. I am the host of the Crowdsourced Politics podcast, Cypher, and we have a good amount of news to cover today. We're going to be getting into some of what RFK said. We're getting into some of the things that Marjorie Taylor Greene said with the NDAA, among other things. So we're going to get into that shortly. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We typically do this every Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to roughly about 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, covering news that was the kind of analysis only the crowd can provide. We try to cover a variety of different topics relating to U.S. politics and culture, and that's what we do here every Thursday. Typically cut those up, add some context to it that we might lose out during the live stream, and put it up on YouTube as well. So if you're watching this live on Twitch, thank you. And if you aren't, well, check us out on YouTube when you can, because we like to do stuff. Some of the stuff that we like to do with the YouTube is also post actual podcast episodes, video essays, and the like on topics that we don't cover here on the News Roundup. We are going to be doing an AI episode shortly. That should be published by the end of the month. I'm still working on it. I've ran into some issues at work, so I haven't been able to work on that as much as I would like to, but that's still in the works, and hopefully it will be done by the end of the month. I have all of next week to myself. My wife is going on a trip, so I'll be working on that while she's gone. So we'll hopefully get it done. Hopefully it'll be published by the 31st. Now it'll be on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. So highly recommend watching it on YouTube because it's going to be video. It's going to be more entertaining. Stuff that you can see that is important to cover AI. This is what we do. But let's go ahead and get started with the show proper here. Videos. All right, hold on a second here, because I had to restart my computer. All my tabs are gone. There we go. All right, up first is news from Russia's war on Ukraine. Let me get up there. Russia has suspended its agreement to the Black Sea grain deal, according to reporting from The Guardian. The announcement reignited fears of the impact on poorer grain importing countries, as well as Western nations dealing with stubbornly high inflation. Ukraine officials said that yesterday that Russia's strikes had destroyed 60,000 tonnage of grain awaiting export. Grain prices have fallen by more than a third under this deal, which had been in place for just under a year. The deal was an attempt to alleviate a food crisis prompted by Russia's blockade of Ukraine ports that had prevented the transport of millions of tons of vital cereals. Germany is working with allies to ensure that Ukrainian grain is not left to rot in its silos. Germany will intensify work on getting the grain out by rail, according to its foreign minister. The UN Security Council will meet tomorrow over the humanitarian crisis of Russia's withdrawal from this deal. Now, for people that may not know, to give this a little bit more context here, is that between Russia and Ukraine, both countries account for combined roughly 20% of the total grain export in the entire world. So without both of those countries able to export grain, able to get it to countries in need, typically they're getting it to countries in Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. A little less in Southeast Asia, a little more in the Saudi Arabia than Africa. It will increase prices for everybody because grain is globally traded, which means it will go to the highest bidder. And because 20% is being removed from the market, that puts pressure up on all other grain prices. So if this deal is not continued, it will result in higher prices for the United States as well. Russia's complaint about this is that it is claiming that it is not able to get its own grain exports out of its ports into the world as well. So they're kind of claiming that what they are claiming is that because their grain is being prevented from export, then Ukraine's grain should be prevented from export as well. I don't buy that as an argument because I haven't seen any evidence that there is actual ongoing sabotage, so to speak, on Russia's ability to export its grain. I just haven't seen any evidence of that. I'm not saying that it is not true because I haven't seen evidence one way or the other, but I feel as though right now that this is not true. And I think there's more evidence pointing to that particular complaint coming from Russia to be less than truthful. Really what this boils down to is that Russia is trying to play politics with grain exports in order to diminish support for Ukraine against Russia. And if they can kind of like squeeze the knobs against, African countries, Middle Eastern countries, etc., then they'll be able to essentially pull their support away from the West and Ukraine itself. Excuse me, ate dinner right before this too. So that's what we're kind of seeing here. And it's a big deal because of the droughts that have been going on in the world. So there's less grain in general in the world because of the droughts in sub-Saharan Africa. The Nile River Delta has had drought experiences. The Middle East has had droughts where they do have water and food production. They've had droughts as well. Southeast Asia has also had issues with the ability to grow everything essentially due to the changing climate. And so this puts more pressure on the entire global food supply. So that's what we're seeing here. I didn't share a link to YouTube on some of these. Give me 1 second. So yeah, let's continue on though. So both Russia and Ukraine have now declared that they will treat vessels in the Black Sea as carrying military cargo, which would make them potential strike targets as well. Russia announced that all ships traveling to Ukraine ports on the Black Sea will be considered carriers of military equipment from today forward. Russia's defense ministry said that it would flag countries of such ships considered parties to the Ukraine conflict. The Ministry of Defense of Ukraine issued its own warning. All vessels in the waters of the Black Sea heading to the direction of seaports of the Russia Federation and Ukrainian seaports may be considered by Ukraine as carrying military cargo with all the associated risk. So this means that even with the ending of the grain agreements, this is going to open up more possible avenues of attack to shipping lanes in the Black Sea, which has its own ramifications if they, sink a cruise ship or I don't know why a cruise ship would be nearing there, but mistakes happen. Russia did shoot down that flight that flew over Ukraine, few years back, right? But yeah, so this is going to cause some issues. Is it going to start World War III? Probably not. It's like there's a reason why all flights fly around Russia now, and that didn't spark World War III, even though American citizens, British citizens were on that flight. So I don't see it being too much of a big deal with that, but it does mean that we'll probably see a few mistakes happen where innocent people are killed due to this increase in tensions. For its part, the Belarus Red Cross sparked international outrage after telling state television that it is actively involved in bringing Ukrainian children from Russia-occupied areas to Belarus as well. This is a separate matter. Both Ukraine and the Belarusian opposition have labeled the transfers unlawful deportations. There have been calls for international war crimes charges for the authoritarian Belarus leader, similar to the charges against Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, this is a pretty big deal in and of itself as well. There have been reports of the forced deportation or immigration of children from Ukraine to Russia for re-educational purposes. And if the Belarusian Red Cross is also involved in doing similar things, that can be a problem. Because it is the Red Cross and a chapter of the Red Cross, I'm not going to assume that it is in the same vein as what Russia's military has been doing with children in eastern Ukraine, but it does have cause for concerns given Belarusians' demeanor towards Ukraine and Russia. I'm giving a little bit of benefit of doubt here as whether or not they're going to be actively involved in like re-education or forced deportations and that sort of thing. It is possible that they're just being evacuated from a war zone into a relatively safe harbor area in order to give them care and make sure that they're able to live their lives. But if they're not doing anything as far as like tracking where the children are from, who their parents are, etc., that's going to cause a whole host of issues down the line. And this is why a lot of people are saying, the people maybe a little bit more hyperbolic than others, are saying that Russia is involved in war crimes and in what people call genocide. Because genocide isn't just the outright extermination of people, but also, killing of them, but also the attempt to extinguish a culture of a people. So if Russia is re-educating children, forced adoptions, forced relocations, etc., those are things that actually lean towards genocide, even though everybody wants to say, oh, it's not genocide because you're not, you don't have death camps. It kind of is. That the original person that came up with the term for genocide had these things in it. And the UN Civil Rights, UN Council for Human Rights also list these kind of things as aspects of genocide. Again, I'm going to give the Belarusian Red Cross a little bit of benefit of doubt here because I don't know exactly what they're doing, and they're the Red Cross. So even though they're Belarusian, they're still the Red Cross. But it's cause for concern, and the calls to, hey, what the fuck's going on here, are not without merit. So we'll leave it at that. Continuing on with other news from the war in Ukraine, Russian media sources are reporting that Russian President Vladimir Putin will address the BRICS summit in South Africa remotely on August 23rd. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. That is what BRICS stands for. It is a combination of these governments kind of in this kind of vaguely economic union kind of thing where they agree to do a lot of trade with each other with lowered barriers for trade between these countries. Kind of view it as a answer to somewhat of the North Atlantic Trade Association, NAFTA, and the European Union. Also a way for China and Russia specifically to try to get around some of the sanctions that might be laid upon them. All right, thirsty. It's a little hot in here. So earlier this week, it was announced the mutual consent between South Africa, Russia, Putin, would not travel to the summit. In March, the ICC issued an arrest warrant for Putin for overseeing the abduction of Ukrainian children in its invasion of Ukraine. It was a rare indictment of a sitting head of state. Russia has denounced the ICC decision, the International Criminal Court, and said it does not apply to Russia because Moscow is not a signatory to the treaty. But Putin has not traveled abroad, save for the occupied territories of Ukraine, since the ICC warrant was announced. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, will lead a delegation in South Africa. The summit is set to take place on August 24th to August 26th. It will bring together representatives from Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It is the first in-person meeting BRICS summit since COVID. And the reason why they're specifically avoiding coming into South Africa is because South Africa is a signatory to the ICC, and under those treaty obligations would be forced, or would be obligated, not forced, but would be obligated under treaty to issue an arrest warrant and arrest and detain Putin proper for these crimes that he's being charged with. So that is what we are seeing here. Let's pull this up because this is interesting. Oh, come on. What the hell? All right. So we have, this is interesting. We have a video that is purporting to show the Wagner mercenary chief. Let me turn these back on. Somewhere. Let's watch. This is coming from The Guardian, which snipped it from the Telegram channel. So this is purporting to show Prigozhin addressing fighters in Belarus and calling the Russia war efforts in Ukraine a complete disgrace. All right, that's enough of that. You kind of get the idea. Yeah, this is more. So this is the video, just this video here, addressing Belarusian soldiers, and Prigozhin still maintaining that, you know, the Russian forces are inept, ineffectual, causing disgrace to the Russian people and Vladimir Putin, blah, 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 blah. All that stuff, right? All of that stuff. So the video is the first footage of the Russian warlord to emerge since mutiny last month. The video was published by 2 Telegram channels affiliated with the Wagner mercenary company. It showed a man who resembled and sounded a little like Prigozhin telling his fighters, quote, "Welcome to the Belarusian land. We have fought with dignity. We have done very much for Russia." Putin last week claimed Prigozhin had rejected an offer for him to step down as the head of Wagner and allow his mercenaries to continue fighting in Ukraine. Instead, an estimated 2,000 Wagner fighters have decamped to Belarus, where some are said to be instructing Belarusian territorial forces at a training camp in the southeast of the capital of Minsk. The opposition Belarusian Hung Project said it believed Prigozhin had flown from Russia to Belarus to deliver the address and later flew back to Russia. Hajun has reported that an estimated 2,000 to 5,000 Wagner fighters are located in Belarus. Since July 11th, 382 Wagner vehicles had entered the country in at least 5 organized columns it had added. Satellite data for the camp indicates that as many as 7,500 fighters could be housed there, although the number of Wagner paramilitaries appears to be much smaller. The arrival of heavy vehicles and large troop numbers is a new development just this week. It suggests that the hastily struck agreement during last month's mutiny is now being implemented. The Pentagon said earlier this month that it believed that the most of Wagner's troops remained at their bases in Ukraine, but were not actively involved in fighting on the front lines since the mutiny. Now, this is really interesting. So, me and a few other people try to get into like what we call an intelligence party, where we share all the information that we're gathering from open source sources and people that we might know based on our prior contacts within either the U.S. military's intelligence apparatus or, you know, just people in general. You might have a friend that joined the CIA or something, shit like that, right? I don't have friends that joined the CIA. I'm just giving you a heads up of what we're talking about. And we're all very much kind of confused about why it ended so quickly. There was some of us that thought that this was Prigozhin's, march to Moscow to take out Putin, and that just didn't materialize. And from this kind of back and forth thing, some of the more conspiratorial-minded people that were involved in this, either from the outside of that group or our friends group, suggested that maybe Wagner is basically repositioning in Belarus to, kind of come in from another angle and confuse the hell out of Western forces, Western intelligence, and Ukrainian intelligence. There isn't really much indication that is the case, simply because that kind of attempt to pincer doesn't appear it would work very well, because those areas are also fortified, because Belarus has been tapped to help Russia in its war in Ukraine, and Ukrainians and Western forces are very much, military intelligence, etc., are very much keeping an eye on any possibility of Belarus itself to also invade Ukraine. So I don't see that necessarily as being a thing that would happen necessarily. It's a possibility. It's not like the possibility isn't zero, but it's not like, I don't think it's above 50% either. I think it's probably significantly below 50%, maybe 30%, 20% or so. In intelligence, in military intelligence and intelligence in general, we all kind of just have this hedge that we do where we say percentage chance of having the ability of occurring, right? It's the possibility. And I just don't see it as being very high possibility of that happening. But it's not 0% chance either. Take it as you will. Now, that said, it's also possible and above 0% chance that the deal that Putin struck with Prigozhin was kind of a save face kind of deal. Or maybe Putin and the Russian military, the FSB, or the FSB rather, had Prigozhin's daughter as a hostage in the negotiations. There's all these other kind of things that could explain why it looks weird, right? Prigozhin during the mutiny met with Russian forces that were amicable. They had amicable ties to Wagner, that looked at Wagner as being like a good force for Russia. And maybe they all just said, hey, we kind of agree that the Russian military isn't really doing its thing very well, but you got to stop this because it's not going to be good for anybody, right? You don't want to trigger a civil war, that sort of thing as well. And if there wasn't as much support for him to do that, to make the final coup de grace, then maybe that's why he pulled out. And maybe because the ability for him to actually have taken over Russia and disposed of Putin was there, everybody was kind of just like, just wipe your hands clean, let's start over kind of thing. And we won't kill you. There's still a high possibility, in my opinion, that they will eventually kill Prigozhin, but he's kind of a true Russia believer. So maybe not. I do think that this does not bode well for him as being the future leader of Russia. He, among all of the autocrats and our oligarchs, among all the oligarchs that Russia has, the inner circle of Putin and who would be likely to succeed Putin should Putin die or step down or what have you happen. He seemed to be the best candidate for that, making gains on the battlefield, directly participating in the battles himself, having high regard from Putin, having a high good regard from the intelligence service, etc. But after the failed coup, if there was a coup, that greatly diminished his ability to have enough clout, so to speak, within the Russian inner circle to do that. Still a possibility. I would say it's 50% or a little better possibility he could still be the next leader of Russia, but it's not like the 90% that I had prior to this mutiny that he led that didn't go anywhere. That's where we're at with that. Let's see. In other news coming out of Russia and Ukraine is that Ukraine's deputy economic ministry held talks with China's vice commerce ministry in Beijing today. This is the first high-level visit by Ukrainian government official to the country, China, since 2019. It came around the time that China's consulate general building in Odessa was damaged in a Russian attack on the city late last night in Kyiv time. China has a no-limits partnership with Moscow, but China is willing to work with Ukraine to develop mutually beneficial bilateral economic and trade cooperation between the two countries. Ukraine's minister said that their side will step up efforts to protect the safety of Chinese-funded enterprises in Ukraine as well. The meeting came on the day of a high diplomacy. Veteran U.S. diplomat Henry Kissinger also met with Xi Jinping, with Chinese senior diplomat Wang Yi also in attendance, according to the Associated Press. In other words, again, China doesn't really necessarily want Russia to win here. China just doesn't want Russia to dissolve into chaos. China and Russia share a border. China gets a lot of money and natural resources from Russia. It has a trading partnership with Russia. Russia still existing is in China's interest, especially if that Russia is more subservient to China. China doesn't want a democratically led Western-facing Russia on its doorsteps. It is in China's interest to have Russia be maintained in the kind of state, not necessarily like as a weakened power per se, but not also going Democrat, not also going, Western facing and being a little more antagonistic to Chinese economic interest and border interest in the area. Because if it does, then China loses a partner to trade with, to put up a buttress against it being invaded, because any land invasion into China will have to go through Russia, more or less, and any air invasion would fly over Russia, or at least the more than likely. It's the same reason why North Korea still exists. China doesn't want North Korea to dissolve either, because then that puts democratic South Korea on its border, which could induce more Chinese citizens to try to flee into South Korea, defect, and hurt its image. So that's where we are here with that. It's why it's important to bring up. But yeah, there's nothing else to really say for that. So, and finally in our coverage of Ukraine, the Washington Post reports that Ukraine has begun firing cluster munitions that were controversially provided by the United States. Russian forces on the front lines of the invasion in southeastern Ukraine have come under attack from the indiscriminate weapons that can remain unexploded. The UN has said Russia has used the widely prohibited weapons in populated areas of Ukraine at least 24 times since the beginning of hostilities. Colonel Olangdar Bakulin told the BBC earlier this week that the weapons were necessary to inflict maximum damage on enemy infantry. Again, Russians are dug into trench warfare. Cluster munitions, cluster bombs, etc. are a good way to clear out the foxholes, because they come in, they go in, they explode, right, to deploy an area, a pretty good sized area with bombs, and then those bombs just blow up, right? And so that's why they wanted these weapons. They wanted them to come in and clear out these foxholes. There are, generally speaking, banned, quote unquote, among other countries that see them as being too indiscriminate in their killing to be used in modern warfare, since a lot of warfare is done within cities where civilians are also at. But this is not that kind of war necessarily that's going on the front lines in Ukraine. And also, it's a war, right? Like, I don't want to have, indiscriminate killing of civilians and the targeting of civilian infrastructure and that sort of stuff going on, but having a cluster bomb deployed not really to me as big of a deal as it is to some other people. I get why it would be to people, and I'm not going to say, oh, you're just stupid because you think these cluster bombs shouldn't be used in war at all. It's just we have a difference in opinion. I don't think either one of us are more right or wrong than the other, and it's not a moral implication for that either. That's where I'm at with that. Finally, a Ukrainian official told the Washington Post that they have been fired at entrenched Russian positions, as previously stated. But that, my friends, concludes this segment of the News Roundup. See a lot of people's watching on YouTube. Thank you. Appreciate that. Got some people watching on YouTube. Got a few people watching on Twitch. We got about 10 people or so watching total. So I appreciate y'all tuning in live to the broadcast. It makes it more interesting. If you have questions, please go ahead and drop them into the chat and I will get to them as they come up. I will also put them on screen for people that watch the clips later to see them as well. Having a hard time with my mouse right now. This over here. All right, and then chat. No, not Chase. All right, but let's continue on though. And now we're going to move on to U.S. politics, starting off with the House of Representatives. And we're going to start with the NDAA causing a ruckus, a rancor, on the House floor. According to reporting from The Conversation, every year for the past 6 decades, members of Congress from both sides of the aisle have come together to pass the National Defense Authorization Act. Because the bill involves the military, it has historically received bipartisan support. The NDAA funds things from, military buying up equipment, all the way to being able to spend money around the world in order to help U.S. forces fight various conflicts or support allies, etc. So it's got some of the things that Republicans typically like. It's got some things that more hawkish Democrats typically like, and military supporters on the Democrat side typically like, especially if there is a war going on that has fairly bipartisan support. When that bipartisan support starts to wane is when we have issues. And we're seeing that a little bit happen now, which is why we're talking about it. Now, that record was threatened in the Republican-led House of Representatives last week, when members passed the $886 billion bill by a 219 to 210 mostly party line vote. The bill stands virtually no chance of passing in the Democratic-controlled Senate without major modifications. The measure didn't get full support in the House because it included Republican amendments that put restrictions on diversity training, abortion access, and medical care for transgender troops. See? Culture war stuff. They don't like it. This is why we're seeing some more back and forth here. Reuters reported that the House also voted 341 to 89 and 358 to 70 to defeat 2 proposals to cut funding for Ukraine as it battles Russia, reflecting bipartisan support for Kyiv. All of votes against the aid came from Republicans. All the amendment votes continued late last week. Democratic leaders of the House Armed Service Committee took the unusual step of announcing they would oppose the amended NDAA, saying in a statement, quote, "The bill was passed out of committee, sent a clear, united message to our allies and partners, global competitors, and the American people that democracy still works and Congress is still functional. That bill no longer exists. What was once an example of compromise and functioning government has become an ode to bigotry and ignorance," they said. Just after the bill's passage, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy tweeted that, quote, "We don't want Disneyland to train our military." And House Republicans just passed the bill that ends the wokeism in the military and gives our troops the biggest pay raise in decades. Fucking kill me, bro. Why? Like, we don't, I guess we don't like equal opportunity training. We don't like it. The Republicans are now against, well, they probably always have been, against equal opportunity training that I had to take, and everybody that's been in the military since 2000 had to take, due to certain actions taken by certain people that resulted in racist outcomes. Yep, racist outcomes. And it's true. It's true. You might not like it, but it's true. These things happened. Especially, and sexist outcomes, mind you. Sexist outcomes. Like actual sexism, like women not being promoted because they're women, and sexual assault being swept under the rug, and people getting hazed because they're the one black guy or the one Chinese guy in the unit, or getting hazed because they're a Muslim in the unit. That one happened while I was in basic training. So, yeah. Now, nearly all the debates over amendments were particularly heated. As just one example, House Freedom Caucus member Matt Rosendale tweeted, quote, "If someone does not know if they are a man or woman, they should not be having their hands on a missile launch button." Democrat Representative Jim McGovern decried House Freedom Caucus tactics. Quote, "It's outrageous that a small minority of MAGA extremists is dictating how we'll proceed. The narrow House victory represents a policy win for the House Freedom Caucus. It will help members raise money for future election cycles and lessen the likelihood that their members will be challenged in a primary from the right flank of their party. But at the same time, these tactics may make it easier for Democrats to win in crucial swing districts during the 2024 election cycle, likely providing a preview of talking points Democrats will use against Republicans in swing districts. Democratic House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries said that, quote, "Extreme MAGA Republicans have chosen to hijack the historically bipartisan National Defense Authorization Act to continue attacking reproductive freedom and jamming the right-wing ideology down the throats of the American people." In exchange for her vote to pass the bill, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican of Georgia, Speaker Kevin McCarthy, in exchange for her vote to pass the Republican bill, Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, a Republican from Georgia, Speaker McCarthy gave her a seat on the House Senate Conference Committee. The Conference Committee will hammer out the differences between the two bills. Here's what she had to say on that last Friday. We'll play this clip for about a minute.
Yeah, it was something I thought a lot about. I spoke with the speaker, and he asked me if I would be part of the conference with the Senate. And in doing so, that allows me to go and be a voice in the room to talk about removing the money going to Ukraine, to talk about the importance that our Department of Defense's mission is to deter war and protect our nation's national security. And I'm very excited to be able to do that. Another thing I get to do is talk about the importance of keeping the Hyde Amendment in the NDAA and making sure that there's no money for transgender surgeries. That just doesn't belong in the military. But also to be able to make sure that we keep in all the good things that we did with the NDAA, the pay increases, the benefits for.
So I don't think anybody is going to vote against the pay increases. Most of the things that are going to have any sort of pushback are going to be on cultural war issues, specifically dealing with how the military addresses racism within the ranks, sexism within the ranks, and anything that has to deal with trans people whatsoever, whether they're allowed to stay in the military, whether the military will accommodate them and give them the ability to continue on to hormone therapy and stuff like that. The military has a very good, the military's healthcare system is generally good and generally, what's the right word I'm looking for? Large, not large, generally good, generally robust. No, that's not the word. Generous, generally good and generally generous is what we're looking for there. Generally good and generally generous. That's the tongue tie. And in the past, while I was in the military, under direction from Obama and the then Joint Chiefs of Staff of the military, they allowed people that were transgender to get gender affirming care while in the military and still serve with honor and distinction. part of the reason for this is that the military wants to be as accommodating to people as possible in order to make sure that its ranks are full. If you are not as accommodating to the broader population, then less people are likely to join the military in general. And if they feel like they're not going to be welcomed in the military, then those are going to have negative impacts on good order and discipline, as well as whether people join in the first place. There was a large amount of people not wanting to join the military while I was in the military, mainly due to the Iraq War and the complications of that. But there wasn't people leaving in droves either among any of these cultural issues that are now to the forefront of what we're seeing today. So I'm not sure that this is really anything people should be concerned with how this is being politicized, but I don't think that the things that Marjorie Taylor Greene are coming up saying here are going to impact military readiness pretty much whatsoever. I don't know what T-Rex. I don't know what this is in reference to. Anyways, let's continue on. Let Marjorie Taylor Greene say her piece for about another 40 seconds.
For healthcare, and so many of the policy.
Oh wait, what was that? She said something about healthcare. Hold on, I paused it at the wrong time. Let's go back to here. There we go.
That just doesn't belong in the military. But also to be able to make sure that we keep in all the good things that we did with the NDAA, the pay increases, the benefits for healthcare. And
trans healthcare is healthcare. Women being able to get medical necessary abortions is healthcare. So just going to disagree with you there, Marjorie.
And so many of the policy changes, getting rid of DEI, getting rid of all these woke policies and language in the NDAA. And
yeah, so again, DEI is just new buzzwords that Republicans have latched onto. Equal opportunity training has been part of the military since roughly 2004, 2005 at least. I'm not sure how far it goes back, but I know it goes back to at least that far because that is when my first girlfriend was in the U.S. military as a grunt. So, or I'm sorry, it's a pog. Anyways, and that's not a bad thing. Telling people, hey, you know what? Don't be racist. Don't treat people differently based on the color of their skin. Don't treat women badly because they're women. Don't make sexual jokes in uniform or around your peers. These are not bad things. These are things that create good order and discipline, especially in a diverse, multicultural, multi-gender military. I mean, I know there are people that want to go back to an all-man military, just men in the military. And I know there are people that don't think, there should be any form of checks against racism for promotions and things like that. But there should be. Even John Roberts agrees that there should be some level of care and recognition that those things actually impact good order and discipline. They impact military morale. They impact military readiness. And if we don't have things to fight against those things, then it just metastasizes and people think it's okay in their little bubbles to continue to do that stuff. Hence why EO training came into existence. And I think Marjorie would probably agree with most of that. Maybe she wouldn't. I don't know.
And I'm excited to have that opportunity. And of course, I made it very clear that obviously this is not final passage, but on final passage, my red line is money to fund and fuel a war that doesn't make sense. I think our policy here should be urging both sides to get to a peace agreement, and money going to Ukraine doesn't belong in our national Department of Defense.
All right, so that concludes her comments about this. Now, just on the last point, whether you believe that spending money in Ukraine is part of the national defense or not, If you don't think it is in America's best interest to help Ukraine win against Russia, to give them the tools necessary to do so, you and I fundamentally disagree about what is in America's best interest. I'm okay disagreeing with that. People can be wrong. You're wrong. Straight up. That is my opinion on this. And the reason I say that that's my opinion on this, the reason why I am such a staunch supporter of helping Ukraine win, especially in the vein that we're doing it with no troops on the ground and them actually winning against Russia and stopping Russia from expanding its territory, is because of two reasons. First, Russia invaded Ukraine. They're the aggressor. Aggressors need to be stopped. They're like bullies. If you don't punch them in the face and make them stop, they're just going to keep bullying people and continue marching forward. Russia had plans and still has plans to take over most of the former Soviet Union and bring it back into the Russian fold. Moldova, Georgia, Belarus, Armenia to a degree, Kosovo. Like, these are places that Russia is involved in from this is our sphere of influence domination, post-Westphalia system where Russia is the big dog in Eastern Europe and everybody should kowtow to its demands. And if you believe in any sort of sovereignty, if you believe in any sort of democracy, if you believe in any of these things, then you should be wanting Russia to lose. Because if they don't lose, it emboldens them and every single other autocrat on the planet that also wants to take over territory by force in order to get resources and the things of that nature. That's the first problem. The second reason being is that I like democracy. Okay? And Ukraine, for all its foibles, for all its faults, is a nascent democracy. And having Ukraine be a democracy benefits the United States. The global hegemonic order that currently exists, that's being threatened by actions such as what Russia is doing, benefits the United States. It benefits you, benefits me. Our ability to have grand trade across the world, mostly unimpeded, allows every single person in the United States to live the life that they are living. We can talk about whether or not we should insource more jobs, so we should have things developed and created in the United States. Fine. Those are arguments we can have. But to think that the United States hegemony, United States driven global order doesn't benefit you is just wrong. Period. It's wrong. You benefit from it. We can talk about the morality of your benefit. We can talk about whether or not, waterboarding is democratic. It's not. That's a war crime. It's torture. That shouldn't be done either. America is not without faults. That is not what I'm saying. But the idea that our ability to trade with people like Taiwan, Ukraine, India, even up to a point, Russia, Western Europe, all the Western European countries, Middle East, the ability to import cheap goods benefits every single one of us to a degree. Our standard of living is as high as it is because of our dominant position in the world. And that's just a fact. But as more information comes out with the NDAA and whatever else comes from it, we will be sure to let you know on this program. But that concludes this segment of the News Roundup. Whew. All right. Oh, fucking back hurts today, man. All right. More news coming out from the House of Representatives. This time, an effort to end sanctions fails. So the House on Tuesday turned back a bid by hardline conservatives to end 5 presidential emergency declarations that allow for sanctions against America's enemies in the Middle East and Africa. According to reporting from Reuters, 4 Republican representatives used separate measures known as privilege resolutions to require votes to end long-standing emergency declarations involving Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Libya, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. The House overwhelmingly rejected these resolutions in a series of votes. Mainstream Republicans and Democrats warned that ending the emergencies would unfreeze the assets of militia leaders, arms dealers, and accused war criminals, while denying compensation to U.S. victims of terrorism. Many of the sanctions date back to presidencies of Republican George W. Bush and Democrat Barack Obama. The hardliners claimed the emergency declarations were out of date and had become examples of the deep state, which was former President Donald Trump's term for Washington officials who opposed his will. It marked the latest effort by hardline conservatives to force Democrats, fellow Republicans, and their own party leaders to vote on controversial measures that otherwise would not have reached the House floor. There's a little bit of argument that can be made about whether or not these, forever, quote unquote, emergencies and sanctions should continue. So I'm not going to begrudge these Republican conservative hardliners on them wanting to end these. That said, I also don't begrudge people that are like, hey, if we're going to do this, we need something to replace it. Otherwise, this money goes to the people that we don't want it to go to. And let's see. Let's go this in order. So Syria. Assad is a piece of shit. But that war is over. So Syria probably we should start acknowledging the reality of that and kind of stop maybe some of those sanctions, or at least get back to the negotiating table over those sanctions to get other things going, and whether or not we want to have any diplomatic relations with Syria. I think we have to acknowledge that, and it is just what it is. Whether or not that means all of Syria goes back to Assad is a different question, but I think that this could be a tool in that negotiating process. Yemen is still a shit show. Full stop. That is going through a civil war where both sides are committing war atrocities. The United States having sanctioned Yemen and the Yemenese government that is committing these crimes with the support of Saudi Arabia is probably something that should continue. Just like we should no longer help Saudi Arabia in those efforts, even providing non-lethal military intelligence. Those are things that probably should happen. Let's go on. Iraq's sanctions should probably just be over. They're an ally now. Continuing the sanctions on Iraq is probably bad. That said, Sadr is probably one of the people that is under sanctions. Maybe al-Sadr should not be removed from those sanctions, given that he is still a warlord, and even though he's trying to normalize his entire movement into some political sort of party, maybe we don't want to have his money go back to him. Iraq in general, definitely need to end that one. I agree with that. And I don't know enough about the Democratic Republic of Congo on what those sanctions are targeting. I know that there was a serious civil war during these time frames. A lot of atrocities were committed. So if that's still going on, maybe those are sanctions that still should be involved, especially if the government is directly contributing to those war atrocities, those human rights violations. But I don't know enough to say one way or the other. So I'm just going to say can't answer that question. So that's where we're at with that. And I think those are fair statements. I don't think anybody should really be against anything I just said. But again, these are things where reasonable people can disagree. And so I'm not going to be like, you're bad over it. But that concludes that segment of the News Roundup. Man, I don't know what's going on with my body lately. I'm old, guys. I am old. I am a weak baby boy. It's not a baby anymore. All right. We got some more we got to cover here.
COVID.
Oh, stop. All right. Now, we got to talk about RFK and what he said, what he didn't say, what he inadvertently, at least, implied, and other things of that nature. Because even if you don't want to acknowledge RFK is potentially a serious political contender who will, if polling still maintains the way it is, has a chance of being on the debate stage with Donald Trump and Biden. There likely won't be a Democratic primary. I don't see it happening. Democratic primary doesn't have to happen. Party gets to decide these things. And to force it on a legal level, you have to have like thousands of petition signatures, and I don't think, tens of thousands rather, petition signatures. And even though Robert F. Kennedy seems to have a good amount of support, I don't see that happening. Not the 10,000, then tens of thousands of signatures across the country to force a Democratic primary. But there is a possibility he will be on the stage, and that spoiler effect is real, so we have to talk about it. So what are we talking about? Well, House Majority Leaders invited Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to testify at a hearing today on alleged social media censorship of his anti-vaccine activism. They stuck by their decisions to host Kennedy even after he... No, he didn't say that. Even after the controversial statements that some had interpreted as being blaming the COVID-19 virus on the Okay, let's track this. The Republicans that invited him to testify on this did so despite the recent controversy surrounding statements he made in a closed interview that was not supposed to be on the record, but leaked anyways. And those controversial statements inadvertently implied to some people that the COVID-19 was, which I will edit into the video later because, censorship is somewhat real when it comes to these things. Don't want to have the video taken down. But things of COVID-19 not being true around ethnicity, specifically with Jewish people and Chinese people. And it should be noted here that in a global perspective of whether or not Jewish people or Chinese people, Ashkenazi Jews specifically, and Chinese people were as impacted by COVID-19 as others, there's not evidence of that really. There is evidence that in the United States, these people were less likely to die, but you have to account for income, healthcare access, doctors respecting people, etc. On a global perspective, millions of people in China died. Tens of thousands of people in Israel died. And both of those countries did massive lockdowns, and Israel specifically had a 92% vaccine intake. They were like the first country to adopt a widespread vaccination program, and most of the country accepted those vaccines before the trials were done. Nikki, I know what he said. I listened to the clip. I'm being very careful with my words here for a reason. I will play the clip. Yes, implied, because I know what the clip is. And I will get to that, which is why I deleted some of the stuff out. Now, continuing on though. Kennedy expressed outrage that his words were taken out of context. So let's take a look at what he said directly. This clip is from the New York Post. No friend to Democrats, no friend to necessarily the idea that COVID is natural. So let's listen to it. I'm going to go ahead and rewind it for a brief second here. There we go.
Receptors.
Oh, wait. All right. And this is what he said directly.
Of the ACE2 receptor. COVID-19 is targeted to attack Caucasians and black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese. But we don't know whether it was deliberately targeted that or not, but there are papers out there.
So I'm going to turn on the closed captions here so we can get that on screen. All right, I'm going to replay it because I think this is important. So let's go ahead and rewind this here.
COVID-19 is targeted.
Oh, wait, can I do this? Yeah, let's put it here. I wanted to get it out of the way. We can put it right. There we go.
To attack Caucasians and black people. The people who are most immune are Ashkenazi Jews and Chinese. But we don't.
So he's saying that COVID-19, he's being inarticulate here. And this is why I think he's stupid. He's being very inarticulate. He doesn't mean that like it's been designed in this segment here, that it is targeting these groups by design. He's saying that, oh, we've seen that it doesn't impact Chinese, Ashkenazi Jews as much as it does black people and white people. However, in the next clip, and this is why I'm saying that he's an idiot rather than trying to say that he was for sure playing into conspiracy theories, is this.
I don't know whether it was deliberately targeted that or not, but there are papers out there that show the racial and ethnic differential impact to that. We do know that the Chinese are spending hundreds of millions of dollars developing ethnic bioweapons, and
we don't know that. That's the problem. So, all right. I think this is where I'm supposed to end it. Let me double check the timestamp here. Okay.
We are developing ethnic bioweapons. That's what all of those labs in the Ukraine are about. They're collecting Russian DNA. They're collecting Chinese DNA.
No, damn it. That is not what the fuck is going on. And this is why he's a conspiracy brain fuckwit. All right. So first, let's talk about we know they're collecting Russian DNA. Came out of a bullshit paper funded by the Russian government for disinformation purposes. That is the first place that it was created at. It is a far-right conspiracy, not even far-right, far conspiracy theory website that promotes the Russian agenda. And the Russian agenda since COVID, and for that matter, Chinese agenda since COVID, has been to blame the United States for developing COVID. So that's one thing, right? Bullshit. Full stop, okay? So, yes, that implication here against Chinese is very much that thing. And since he knows and since he believes that COVID-19 had been created, and he knows, supposes that we're trying to create bioweapons, we as a species, specifically the Chinese in this instance, then obviously that this is trying to target people to harm the United States. It is absolutely, positively fucking bullshit. Full stop. No questions about it. There is no evidence that that COVID is at all a bioweapon, and we don't even have the technology to target ethnicities. And what he's talking about, again, with we had papers out there, which just means he read something off the fucking internet, okay? But we have papers out there, and you know, we saw the differences in how Chinese people and Chinese people and Ashkenazi Jewish people died. Doesn't take into account any of the other things that I brought up. Economics, wealth, income, access to healthcare, differences in familiar cultural proclivities to like gather and live in a lot of people into a single house. Things like this, not taken into account whatsoever, which is if the CDC image that went around, that's viral, that's going around in more right-leaning spaces is true, would explain why it was taken down. Because it was implying and playing into the bullshit conspiracy theories that are going around online. And this man has a chance, a small chance, to be president because we are in a age of just rank paranoid schizophrenic bullshit when it comes to conspiracy theories. The amount of trust that exists in the system, not to the system, the trust in the system, the amount of distrust that exists within all of American society is at its lowest point since I've been alive. And he should have known better. So even if he didn't mean to imply with his words that this was a bioweapon, even if he didn't mean to imply with his words that this is somehow created by one of those two groups, he did. And it's not a giant freaking leap of logic or assumptions. Especially after he said, well, China is developing ethnic biological weapons. Fuck me. Eat my ass, dude. Don't come at me and say, oh, I'm just making shit up. I'm a liar. I'm not operating in good faith. When that's what he fucking said. Eat my ass. Okay. Now with that out of the way, with a little bit of good reporting, let's get into more of the reporting. So for those that may not know, Kennedy is running for president as a self-proclaimed Democrat. Representative Jerry Connolly, Democrat of Virginia, called Kennedy's appearance today another example of Republicans having quote-unquote crackpot witnesses. Continuing on, he said, it makes them all look silly. Kennedy's own family has said, we don't support any of that. So you're going to put a discredited witness at the table that is going to embarrass himself, embarrass the family, and embarrass Republicans? That is your witness? Connolly asked. It should be noted here that the gallery in Congress, did really like what Kennedy had to say. But the gallery wasn't a public gallery. It was people that are Kennedy supporters. Again, if we think that if there's this idea that a lot of politics is just propaganda and manufacturing consent and all this other stuff, why would you think that a gallery of an invited guest with most of the people that seem to be in attendance are supporters of his isn't part of that? Is it because you like him? Is it because you agree with him? Are you just blind to your own biases? I don't know. But I think you should question that. And no, I am not talking about anybody in particular here. This is a general comment because I don't know anybody. I might talk with people and debate people all the fucking time across like 40 Discords, 250,000 Twitter threads or Twitter clone threads, Twitter, Mastodon, Threads, Blue Sky, Facebook, Reddit. I might be engaged with you on a daily basis in some capacity, but I still don't know you. So I don't know what you actually believe. I don't know why you might like Kennedy. I don't know why you might include the narrative of why you might think that the media is trying to smear him. You could be giving him the benefit of doubt because you yourself would not want to be smeared. And I get that. This is why I said inadvertently said this. This is why I said that he was inarticulate in his discussion about what was going on. Because he was. He might not want to implicate China and Jewish people at large for this, but that's what his words did. It played into the two biggest conspiracies of the existence of this thing. He played into the two biggest ones. And as a presidential candidate, you are supposed to be better than that. I remember a time when all presidential candidates would get lambasted and disgraced when they went, yeah! I'm sorry, I just broke your eardrums. But you know what I mean here. We used to hold our politicians to a higher standard. And I, for one, wish that we go back to a time where we actually do that. But that's just me and my country folksy wisdom. No, I'm not making fun of country people. I just thought it would be a good bit. You get what I'm saying, though, right? Bia, by fucking Howard Dean, sunk his entire political campaign to be president. He was in the lead until he did that, and he became memeable. Like, this was what, 10 years ago? We're talking 20, this was less than 20 years ago. I was into politics when this happened as a teenager. Or, wait, as a 20-something-year-old. Okay? Come on. Continuing on, though. As reported by Time magazine, today's hearing devolved into a messy, meandering scene that epitomized the work of the much-hyped Government Weaponization Committee. Over the course of 5 hearings, Republicans have largely failed to delve into concrete abuses by federal agencies. Instead, they've brought in witnesses who have provided little information and have been criticized for spreading conspiracy theories themselves. The proceedings have been peppered with frequent interruptions, sporadic shouting, and references to George Orwell and the Orwell. Let me restate that. The proceedings have been peppered with frequent interruptions, sporadic shouting, and references to George Orwell and the Lord of the Rings. Quote, "The eye of Sauron has turned inward, and it is operating with hot intensity that seeks to destroy everything in its path." Representative Harriet Hedgeman, a Wyoming Republican, somberly noted in May in a reference to the FBI. Committee hearings have been a series of starkly partisan, occasionally surreal hearings that have generated a lot of tense exchanges, but very little in the way of new evidence. And today's hearing was no exception. It was billed as an examination of a lawsuit to block Biden administration officials from contacting social media companies to moderate online posts and big tech's collusion with out-of-control government agencies to silence speech. Sure. But it unraveled into attempts to support or refute Kennedy's conspiracy theories on vaccinations, discussions about Hunter Biden's laptop, and a near shouting match over whether COVID-19 was engineered, ethnically engineered. All in all, it was another bizarre hearing put on by MAGA Republicans in the House, a performance for an audience of one. And all of the supporters of Donald Trump, because this is where the Republican Party is now. The Republican Party is here. This is what it does. This is where the viral sensations that go out into the ether and the zeitgeist come around and get eyeballs on them and drive donor dollars and just out and out reverence, fevered reverence and support for these people to go out into community and generate buzz and support for their candidates. And that is why we're seeing this. Social media has rotted the entire American psyche. And I'm contributing to it. But with that, my friends, I am sad to say that we are done with the segment. There we go. Oh, I am far behind. Well, I'm very far behind. All right. Let me go get, I will, shoot. All right, let's continue on now to the Senate. And let's talk about some of the stuff coming out of Senate committees around various different things. And first up, we're going to talk briefly about the committee that passed out of committee a anti-AI in employment law. Out of committee, not a law yet, but still progress. So Pennsylvania Democratic Senator Bob Casey introduced 2 new bills today that target the use of artificial intelligence and surveillance technology in the workplace, according to The Hill. The legislation would bar employers from relying exclusively mind you, on artificial intelligence to make hiring, firing, promotion, and disciplinary decisions in the workplace. It would also create a task force to study such automated decision systems. Quote, right now, there is nothing stopping a corporation from using artificial intelligence to hire, manage, or even fire workers without the involvement of a human being, Casey said in a press release. Continuing on, he stated, quote, as robot bosses become more prevalent in the workplace, we have an obligation to protect working families from the dangers of employers misusing and abusing these novel technologies, he added. The No Robot Bosses Act would prohibit employers from solely using an automated decision system to make employment-related decisions. It would also require regular testing for discrimination and biases in such systems and mandate independent human oversight of their use. A lot of people misinterpret this as saying, what? Is math bias now? Are the analytical systems we use to measure things racist? Yeah, maybe. That's the point. If they're not open to the public for looking at to see where their data is and how they're making these decisions, it could reflect historical biased information. For example, if we use data from before, let's say, 1980, and we go all the way back to, let's say, 1920, that data is going to have racial biases included in it. Because regardless of what you want to say about today, everyone can agree that America was pretty racist back then. Hiring, firing, looking at how behavior was between different ethnic groups. I think this is just common knowledge, and I don't think anybody with any sort of good faith could argue against those things. And so if we included data from those points, then those racist biased programs, outcomes, looks at how people acted would end up biasing the system. Here's another one. Maybe in one culture, a word means one thing, and in another culture, it means something different. Or maybe it's not a word that means differently, but it's an entire phrase that is, I don't know, seen as cordial, or another, it seemed as being very much antagonistic. If you don't have that included in your algorithm, and you have those phrases that come into a resume or whatever else have you, or even an email, maybe you're going to come off as more cold to somebody from one culture than another. And if that algorithm that's checking the emails or, resumes and form letters or cover letters and such as that doesn't take those into account, those cultural differences, well, then you're going to have a biased system, because the people that design it didn't know that, hey, in this culture over here, thumbs up means fuck you. It's stuff like that, right? And so we have to take these into account because we live in a multi-ethnic, multicultural, pluralistic democracy. And that is how, and taking these things into account, is how you create a more cohesive system that recognizes the differences between people and, accounts for those things in a fair and just manner. So that's what we have here. Continuing on, though, a summary of the bill from Casey's office pointed to several hypothetical scenarios in which job applicants and workers could be harmed by automated decision systems. These systems include recruitment software automatically rejecting a resume over an employment gap, or tracking algorithmic firing an employee without warning for not performing up to its standards. in addition to everything that I just said. Casey and Schatz were also joined by New Jersey Senator Cory Booker, introducing the Exploitive Workplace Surveillance and Technology Task Force Act, which would create a task force to study the use and impact of automated decision systems and workplace surveillance. If you worked from home during the pandemic, or even work from home now, and you're a part of a company that checks how often you're flagged as available on Teams or Google or Messenger or whatever else your company uses to message back and forth, you're under surveillance. They're making sure that you don't commit time theft. And that's why we have these mouse jigglers and all these other kind of things to get around that, because sometimes you just need to sit at your desk and go for like 5 minutes while you try to think of an answer to a question or whatever else. And that's not time theft. That is actually working. And so if you've had experiences with that, or you had, a ping said, hey, are you available? And it's 5 minutes before quitting time and you're in the bathroom and that ping's automated and you don't respond. And so they ding you that 5 minutes. You're under surveillance. These are things that I think that we should all kind of agree are a bit intrusive, to say the least. And it can go further. It can be looking at micro expressions on your face while giving a presentation to make sure that you are not being a dick because you rolled your eyes, or I don't know, you frowned at a question said by a boss. So yeah, I have to go take care of my dogs real quick. I will be right back. They're barking up a storm. But we conclude this segment of the News Roundup. I apologize for that, everybody. They were barking. And I don't know why. So I turned on the fan and let them into the office. They're here with me now. My smallest one's under my desk. My bigger dog does not like going through the green screen, so she's still behind it. But they're here now, so if they start barking, again, I apologize, but I think this will keep them to be shut up. All right. Let's see. Another story coming out of the Senate is dealing with the SCOTUS. And this reporting is based on NBC reporting. Another bill coming out of the Senate is one that deals with the SCOTUS. And this is based on reporting from NBC News. So the Democratic-led Senate Judiciary Committee advanced legislation today that would require the Supreme Court to set up a code of conduct, tighten financial disclosures, and bolster recusal requirements for justices. The vote on the Supreme Court Ethics, Recusal, and Transparency Act was 11-10 on party lines, with all Republicans opposing the measure. I wonder why. They're the ones. They're good boy. Oh shit, that's not what I mean. They're good. They're good. The chosen among them. Clarence Thomas, Alito, are two of the biggest people under ethics corruption scandals right now, and they don't want to see them have to recuse themselves on a number of different bills, or I'm sorry, not bills, but court cases that deal with their donors and such things. So yeah, that would be why they don't want this to happen. Now, this bill was championed by Senate Judiciary Chairman, Illinois Democrat Dick Durbin, and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat of Rhode Island. The bill is in response to reports about justices that raise questions about conflicts of interest. Quote, this legislation will be a crucial first step in restoring confidence in the court after a steady stream of reports of justices' ethical failures have been released to the public, Durbin said, citing reports about potential ethics lapses by Justice Clarence Thomas and Justice Sonia Sotomayor. The public support for the Supreme Court is at an all-time low. He is right about that. I think it is at a low not just because of these things, but because of the partisan politics that surround Supreme Court nominations in general, and the fact that once on the court bench, there's really no way to remove them due to ethics concerns and partisan politics, as well as them being on the bench for life. So yes, this is a first step, but I don't think it's going to fully restore faith in the justice system, or I'm sorry, faith in the Supreme Court itself. I think that is basically the idea that the Supreme Court is non-political is dead. I think the vast majority of people now see the court as an extension of party politics. And even though there are some weird rulings that, show that it's not quite the case, with some of the stuff that happened recently, which were good rulings, mind you. And there's some heterodoxy that exists within the court's legal framework among the justices that create these, I wasn't expecting that ruling to happen. The politics are there. The proof is in the pudding. Perception is reality, etc. Proof is in the pudding, politics, etc. I normally walk my dogs in about 30 minutes or so that's why they're antsy. They probably need to go, but we're going to continue on. We're going to press forward. Continuing on. The Associated Press reported earlier this month that Justice Sotomayor has benefited from school purchases of hundreds, sometimes thousands, of the books she has written over the years. Sotomayor's staff has often prodded public institutions that have hosted the justice to buy her memoir or children's book, works that have earned her at least $3.7 million since she joined the court in 2009. The new bill would give the court 180 days to adopt and publish. Okay. Sotomayor's staff has often prodded public institutions that have hosted the justice to buy her memoir or children's books, works that have earned her at least $3.7 million since she joined the court in 2009. This is recent revelations that we have seen in the prior weeks. And these are also concerns, even if you think it's not that big of a deal, because, well, they hosted her. Now her staff is saying, hey, buy her book, you know? And then some of these cases come to the Supreme Court. So even some of these schools or public institutions and stuff might have cases on this at the Supreme Court. So even if she isn't, you know, ruling in a way that is part of that, you know, give and take, it still looks like she might be. So again, even if you don't think that she's doing that she's not ruling, that she is ruling properly or not being swayed by these buys or whatever, the appearance of impropriety is in of itself an issue. With that, the new bill would give the court 180 days to adopt and publish a code of conduct and allow the public to submit ethics complaints that a randomly selected panel of the lower court judges would review. It would also establish new rules for disclosure of gifts and travel, and it would impose recusal rules pertaining to gifts, income, and other potential conflicts. The legislation would need 60 votes in the full Senate to defeat a likely Republican filibuster. If it does pass the Senate, it will still need the approval from the GOP-controlled House, where leaders have expressed no interest in considering it. Republicans blasted the legislation as an attempt to tarnish the reputation of certain conservative justices and argued that the Supreme Court can police itself without Congress stepping in. Again, this benefits them. Of course they're going to say these things. This is all politics. It's all politics all the time. Maybe the court shouldn't have lifetime appointments. That would make the ramifications and that would make the stakes. That would make the stakes of appointments much lower. Hey, you got a Supreme Court majority for 10 years. See you in 10 years. You know, like it just tamps down on all of these things. Maybe we shouldn't have these things anymore. Maybe the norms that we used to rely on are no longer working. You know, common sense stuff. Continuing on. District and appeals court judges are bound by a judicial ethics code that require judges to, quote, to avoid impropriety and the appearance of impropriety in all activities. Supreme Court is not. Judges who breach the code can be investigated and reprimanded through a separate complaint process. The Supreme Court, however, has no procedure for complaints to be investigated short of the substantial step of impeachment. And because the stakes of a Supreme Court justice being impeached are so high for either party, depending on who it is that's being impeached, the likelihood of that happening is practically zero. So it's not going to happen. So we need something else to do this. Again, the norms that we relied upon in the past are broken and no longer serve their purpose. The 9 justices say they follow the spirit of the code, but they have never adopted one of their own. And revelations from groups like ProPublica have proven, at least in my opinion, that they don't even follow the spirit of the code. For their part, Republicans claim that the legislation could make it easier for liberal interests to force members of the court to step aside from contentious cases, whether or not the complaint has any merit. And it would be the same thing for any of the Republican ones, because that's how we are. Sometimes you need recusal to happen because you're accepting gifts from people that are going to the court. Maybe you shouldn't accept gifts from people that are going to end up being at the court. Maybe you shouldn't have rich billionaire friends flying you all over the place. As a rule, maybe you shouldn't be friends with them. Or if you're friends with them, maybe you should pay for everything out of pocket. You have money. It's not like you're broke. Sure, maybe your judge salary and the fact that you get healthcare for free isn't making you feel as rich and powerful as you feel the position you have on the Supreme Court is what you should have. Maybe you feel constrained and not being able to be part of the elite that you feel your position should give you. I don't care. Don't do it. It's simple. And all kinds of excuses like Alito said, well, if I didn't take it, the seat would have just been empty. And I was following the advice of my colleagues who are also getting the same thing. And you know, by colleagues, he means Scalia. Because Scalia, as we know, died on a private resort that was paid for by a conservative donor. He was there for free on a little hunting trip. And Justice Breyer traveled the second or the most, I don't remember which one, traveled Supreme Court justice his entire time he was there. Also getting paid for, getting these trips paid for by people that may have had business at the Supreme Court. Norms to have people follow don't work. Rules can work. And we need some rules for the Supreme Court that have consequences for violating them. And we need to have it be to where the stakes of appointing a Supreme Court justice aren't as high as they are. We need both of those things to change to tamp down on the political division that the court itself inherently, by its design, increases. But with that concludes this segment of the News Roundup. Thank you all for staying around. I appreciate it. I know that I've been kind of a little bit all over the place with this, specifically because my dogs have been barking up a storm and all sorts of other stuff. So please, I would appreciate it if you smash that like button for the algorithms. It really does help us out. Now, there's ways that you can get a hold of us to have us cover anything that you want to hear, or various other ways to get in touch. If you want to debate me, you want to come on the show during the News Roundup, we do allow call-ins. So if that's something you want to do, please join the Discord. Link above or below, depending on where you're watching it. We're really trying to build up our Discord community, and it's where we'll host all sorts of things for events and stuff. I am not really using Twitter all that much. There's some post I make every once in a while. I'm more using Mastodon. So if you do that, you can also reach me at CSP Cypher at federated.press. I also have a Blue Sky, csp.bluesky.social, I think is the name of it. I'll get a thing up there, but we can find us on Blue Sky. So if you use Blue Sky, we're there too. And those are the ways you can get a hold of us. We do, like I said, we do still have a Twitter, not using it much anymore, but if you need to message me on Twitter for whatever reason, maybe that's your platform, you can message me at crowdsourced poll on Twitter. Those are the ways you can get a hold of me. Again, not really using Twitter all that much, using the other ones more frequently now. All right, let's see. We're going to skip that segment here because I'm behind. Let's get into U.S. economy bites. So, what's going on with the U.S. economy? Not a whole lot bad. Some good things. In fact, what's happened to the supposed recession that we're supposed to have had? Now, the following that we're reporting on today is derived from reporting from the New York Times, as well as other places. Experts had said that the recession was supposed to have begun by now. Beginning last year, policymakers relentlessly raised interest rates to combat the fastest inflation in decades. Forecasters began talking as though a recession, an economic contraction rather than growth, was a question not if, but when. Possibly in 2022. Possibly in the first half of 2023. Surely by the end of the year. As recently as December, less than a quarter of economists expected the United States to avoid a recession, according to a survey. But the year is more than halfway over, and the recession is nowhere to be found. Not in the job market, as the unemployment rate, at 3.6%, is hovering around a 5-decade low. Not in the job market, as the unemployment... I'm going to have to repeat this because I got to get it for the clean cut. Not in the job market, as unemployment rate at 3.6% is hovering near a 5-decade low. Not in consumer spending, which continues to grow, nor in corporate profits, which remain robust. Not even in the housing market, the industry that is usually most sensitive to raising interest rates, which has shown signs of stabilizing after slumping last year. At the same time, inflation has slowed significantly and looks set to keep cooling, offering hope that interest rates increases are nearing an end. All of this is leading economists, after a year spent being surprised by the resilience of the recovery, to wonder whether a recession is coming at all. Arguments, here as an aside, arguments can be made that we had a very small recession at the beginning of 2022, or was it the beginning of this year? When did we have that recession? Let me double check that. I believe it was at the beginning of this year, but I'll clip that in. Anyways, can't Google it right now. All the news stories about the fact there is no recession are coming up instead. Anyways, all of this is leading economists, after a year spent being surprised by the resilience of the economy, to wonder whether a recession is coming at all. An argument can be made that there was a small recession earlier in the past year or so. I think it was the first quarter of this year, but that was very mild and not a recession that most people would consider to be a recession. There's still a long way to go, but the US consumers are starting to feel better about the economy. The University of Michigan Monthly Consumer Sentiment Index hit 72.6 for July, the highest reading since September of 2021. By comparison, the index remains below the high of 101 it reached in February of 2020, just prior to the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the sentiment measure has now climbed 8 of the past 11 months. And the so-called misery index, which adds the unemployment rate to the inflation rate, is now approaching pre-pandemic levels. While there is nearly uniform agreement among economists that the US is not in a recession, certain segments of the American public don't seem to believe it, especially among Republicans. Political affiliation is one of the strongest determinants of views on the economy, with the Michigan index now at 96.7% among Democrats compared to just 49.3% among Republicans. Among independents, it is 71.5%. Historically, individuals who identify with the party out of power from the White House rate the economy lower than those who share the president's party. The Michigan Index does show sentiment among all three political affiliations now trending upward. Still, the partisanship gap has rarely been this acute, this wide, this present. Other polls show similar breakdowns. Gallup finds that while overall Americans rate the economy negatively, Republicans rate it at negative 65%. Or 65, sorry. Gallup finds that while overall Americans rate the economy negatively, Republicans rate it at negative 65, with independents at negative 35 and Democrats in positive territory at plus 5. Even as improved economic data is published, it can take years for people to meaningfully change their minds about the economy, said Jeff Jones, senior editor with Gallup. Following the global financial crisis of 2008, views about the economy did not truly improve until about 2012, even though economic growth technically bottomed out in the spring of 2009, which meant people were still feeling the brunt of the Great Recession well into 2012, even though economically speaking, from a pure GDP growth level, the economy was not doing great, but it was no longer in a recession. And that's probably true from COVID, and also due to inflation. Prices are still high. People aren't used to these high prices. Prices are still going up. They're going up more slowly, but they're still going up. And so people are like, man, last time I bought a Coke was like $1.52 or $2, right? Well, last time I bought a 20-ounce Coke, it was $2. Now it's $2.60. What's going on, right? These giant leaps in prices from purchases that people don't do on a day-to-day basis are like, they stick out, right? Food prices stick in people's minds. Eggs being, $2 a dozen or whatever the price is, because I don't buy eggs. I don't really buy eggs all that much. Whatever they were, when those spiked, it took a while for the supply chain to redo, to come into more equilibrium after there was the huge amount of bird death due to avian flu in the US. It took a while for those prices to come back down a little bit, and they still didn't come all the way down. That's going to impact people's sentiment on the economy. Once people get used to these prices being stable or not going up as much, so we'll say like 6 months or so of prices barely edging up at all, or even some going down, a little up, a little down, and basically staying stagnant, people will feel a little bit better about the economy, especially if wages continue to go up. So everything's lagging, right? All these sentiment lags actual economic data kind of sometimes lags. The Fed lags economic data. Like, these things are all in the ether out there, but people aren't experiencing them in the same way at the same time. So that's what we have here. Continuing on though, while earnings growth is now outpacing inflation, the improved purchasing power only amounts to a few cents. Again, messing with people's ability to feel good about the economy. And the cumulative price increase of the post-pandemic era has been nearly 20%. 80-20 rule, man. If it's up more than 20, if it's more than 10%, people are gonna be like, what the fuck? Even if prices are stable and people's wages are going up, that's still sticker shock. Quote, historically, we've seen it takes people a while to notice when the economy has improved, Jones said. And now, that's what we have. We're going to have that. It's going to still be the thing. If we avoid a hard landing, if we avoid the Fed pushing the economy into a recession with rate increases, then people will start to feel positively about the economy more than likely halfway through next year, right when the election's gearing up. Not even halfway, we'll say Q2 of next year, when we'll see the sentiment of the economy, assuming nothing drastic happens, assuming there's not a recession that comes out of nowhere in the fall because people just suddenly seize up their spending. I don't think that's going to happen, but hey, it could, right? The Fed could push interest rates so high that people just stop spending for whatever reason. But bearing anything like that, we'll see positive sentiment in the economy increase after the winter. So that bodes well for Biden, but we'll see. But that, my friends, concludes this segment of the News Roundup. And we're going to skip that too. All right. Let's move on to more information here. So the News Roundup. Let's move on to some more information here. The Roundup's News Bite segment will focus this week on a couple of stories from Texas and Florida, where the bizarre has turned the corner into outright cruelty. Let's start with Texas. For more than 2 years, Governor Greg Abbott of Texas has pursued an increasingly aggressive approach to the border. He sent thousands of National Guard troops and police officers to patrol the Rio Grande and tested the legal limits of state action on immigration. But in recent weeks, Texas law enforcement officials have taken those tactics much further, embarking on what the state has called a hold the line operation. According to an investigation by the New York Times, they have fortified the riverbanks with additional According to investigation by the New York Times, they have fortified the riverbanks with additional concertina wire, denied water to some migrants, and shouted to others to return to Mexico. In some cases, they have deliberately failed to alert federal Border Patrol agents who might assist arriving groups in coming ashore and making asylum claims. The approach has alarmed people inside the U.S. Border Patrol and the Texas Department of Public Safety, which is the chiefly responsible for pursuing the governor's border patrol policy. Several Texas officers have God damn it, fucking noise. Several Texas officers have lodged internal complaints and voiced opposition. An email from a state police medic describes exhausted migrants being cut up by razor wire, a teenager breaking his leg to escape the barriers, and officers being directed to withhold water from migrants struggling in the perilous heat. That medic, Trooper Nicholas Wingate, said in an email to supervisors on July 3rd that numerous migrants, including a pregnant woman, had gotten tangled in the razor wire. He said that the woman was doubled over and in obvious pain, stuck in the casualty wire. A 4-year-old girl who attempted to cross was pressed back by Texas Guard soldiers due to orders given to them. The trooper called further attention to how the placement of razor wire traps push people to travel through the most unsafe areas and deeper parts of the Rio Grande. The conditions caused at least 5 people to drown or go missing that week, according to this email. The actions described in the email drew broad condemnations from Texas Democrats in Congress and from the White House after the email was reported by the Houston Chronicle. And the objections within the Texas Department of Public Safety extended far beyond a single medic. At least 3 other officers working around Eagle Pass have expressed their outrage and misgivings to higher-ups, according to internal. At least three other officers working around Eagle Pass have expressed their outrage and misgivings to higher-ups, according to internal correspondence and interviews with state officials briefed on the border response. In Brownsville, near the mouth of the Rio Grande, the state police officers have been standing guard at crossing points between 2 layers of concertina wire. The increasing aggressiveness has created international tensions with Mexico. In addition to placing concertina wire, Texas has deployed a 1,000-foot float. In addition to placing concertina wire, Texas has deployed a 1,000-foot floating barrier of bayous into. God fucking damn it! Because I'm getting hot. Hold on. I am not on my A game today. All right. Itchy nose. All right. All right. We can do this. All right. In addition to placing concertina wire, Texas has deployed a 1,000-foot floating barrier of buoys into the Rio Grande and Eagle Pass this month. Mexican officials have said the barrier may have violated international treaties and could encroach on Mexican territory. Texas officials have blamed the Biden administration for allowing a chaotic situation on the border. They said the buoy barrier and concertina wire were designed to deter people from risking a dangerous swim across the Rio Grande and direct them to safe official border crossing stations. Quote, "No orders or directions have been given under Operation Lone Star that would compromise the lives of those attempting to cross the border illegally," Abbott said in a joint statement with top officials this week. But that statement belies the reality of what is happening here, because they are posting these things that are designed to make the trek even more dangerous than it already is. If it was just a matter of, hey, go to a safer point of entry, right, and come in that way, then they would just simply take them to there. Or, I don't know, put boats and like turn people back, not put in barbed wire, not put in floating cement blocks that, you know, when people try to cross, they drown, that sort of thing. They could just be, you know, patrolling, you know, put a flotilla of people and be like, nope, go back. We got you. Go back. Like, you're not crossing here. Here's a small barrier. You don't have to use concertina wire. Nonsense. Continuing on though. The new Texas tactics have frayed relations between the state and federal law enforcement agencies that have long worked together to monitor the border. In a memo to the Texas DPS last month, Border Patrol officials in Eagle Pass area raised concerns that the concertina wire placed along the water by Texas officials was creating new hazards for migrants as well as those for all federal border agents. At the same time, state police supervisors have been directed by their own superiors not to alert Border Patrol when encountering groups of migrants. Instead, they are told to handle the situation themselves. A recent text read, quote, "Can you please push out a message to your troopers," referring to those stationed in a city-owned park by the International Bridge in Eagle Pass? Continuing on, quote, "They're not to call Border Patrol BP when they see a group approaching or already on the bank." Why would they do this? Because they don't trust Border Patrol to send them back. That's what it is. Officers were instead directed to make arrest for criminal trespassing an element of Operation Lone Star. Because if you arrest them, then that's more punishment, I guess. I don't know. It deters them. The whole like, you can, if you arrest enough people, less people will come, is dumb. That's not how people work. People are desperate. Even if you arrest them, that's what, 3-4 months in a prison or in a jail, because it's criminal trespass, which is not serious felony, so it's not that much of time in prison. So they're not going to prison, they're going to be in jail. Yeah, jail sucks. It's still better than being hunted by the cartel. And you're going to get released. And even if you get released over the border, you're not dead. And you still have a family back home you want to feed. So you're just going to do it again. More than likely. Also, because you're not catching everybody, hey, they can't catch us all. And so more people just show up. And more people means more resources that have to be done to try to eliminate this. And even though the trek might be dangerous, it's not dangerous enough to ensure that nobody passes. So as long as people can get through, they're going to take their chances too. Because the alternative is even worse. We have to acknowledge this. We have to acknowledge it. Now, these allegations come as Abbott, a Republican, has authorized more than $4 billion in spending on Operation Lone Star, which has included busing thousands of migrants to Democratic-led cities. The Austin American-Statesman reported yesterday that Texas has received the #1 spot on a not-so-pleasant list, the top 10 worst places in America to live in 2023. While Texas landed a #6 on CNBC's yearly America's Top States for Business study, the state scored significantly low in one category: life, health, and inclusion. Factors in this category include crime rates, environmental quality, healthcare, quality and availability of childcare, inclusiveness in state laws such as reproductive rights, protections against discrimination, and voting rights. Texas received 53 out of 350 points for its 2023 Life, Health, and Inclusion score, giving an F in its top states grade, and that the lowest nationwide, securing its #1 spot on the list of one of the worst places to live, but a good place for business. Now, even if you don't want to include things like, I don't know, reproductive rights and protections against discrimination and voting rights, even if you're a conservative, like, I don't give a shit about that. We don't want to make it easy for people to vote, because voting is not a right, it's a privilege. Or even if you're not that far, even if you say, well, I want people to have an ID to vote, I think it should be harder to, I think there shouldn't be this easy way to vote, like driving up in what Houston did, or, voting by mail, etc., which are probably things that are included in this to a degree. Even if you say that's fine, and even if you think abortion is murder, well, quality and availability of childcare, you should care about that. You should care about healthcare. Texas is one of the worst places to give birth in the country because of infant mortality rates. So that's a problem. You should care about environmental quality. It is getting way too hot in this state. Okay, so even if you say, okay, just that's outside of the state's control, State burns a lot of shit. It's got smog. There's pollution. Chemical factories and oil refineries blow up all the time. So this is something you should care about. And I know for a fucking fact, every single Republican cares about crime. And they want to be tough on crime. And if the tough on crime isn't working to diminish crime, and crime is a problem in Texas, this should concern you. I live in Texas. It is my adoptive state. I am staying here for the foreseeable future. 1, wife and her family are here. 2, my job is pretty good. 3, I own a house. Well, I own a mortgage. Anyways, so I'm not going anywhere for a while if I do it at all. And so this is my adoptive state. And I can tell you, even in safe neighborhoods, crime is a problem. Even when said crime is being handled by other police than Austin police, when Texas Department of Public Safety is in charge of it. Even in places like Dallas, where, again, the crime rate is not astronomical, and they're a bit more conservative when it comes to dealing with crime. And that, I mean, conservative policy-wise to address it and stuff like that. Houston, all these cities, you can say they're blue-run cities, but they're very conservative in some of their approaches. And so, this should concern you. Texas might be great for business. Not so great as far as a person of modest means is concerned. And you should care about that. Or is that just me? I don't know. Tell me. Let me know in the comments. But regardless, that concludes this segment of the News Roundup. Now, let us move on to the Florida news bite. And then we're going to have to call it a day. All right. Florida. Oh, Florida. Florida man gonna Florida man. So this is from... Florida man's gonna Florida man. Time magazine reported that Governor Ron DeSantis put much of Florida off limits to many Chinese immigrants with the signing of SB 264. The new ban bans several counties and people in their governments from owning land within 10 miles of military bases and other crucial infrastructure, such as airports. The restriction includes people here lawfully as professors, students, employees, and scientists who are looking to buy a home in the state. The law also unfairly discriminates against many immigrants from Cuba, Venezuela, Syria, Iran, Russia, and North Korea. But it singles out people from China for especially draconian restrictions and harsher criminal penalties. The law ultimately weaponizes false claims of national security breaches against Asian immigrants and others. Lawmakers across the country are trying to enact similar laws to ban Chinese citizens and other immigrants from owning property, but Florida is the first one to pass and go into effect. This is more than likely completely unconstitutional. Yes, permanent residents have rights too. Those rights do exist. You don't have to be a citizen to own stuff in the US. We don't have that system. And we don't have it because we're a nation of immigrants and democratic nation. So these laws are bad. Now, we can talk about whether businesses owned by Chinese citizens in China should own property to sit there and use for wealth accumulation. We can argue about that. That's different. These are people that live here being ineligible of buying property. That's where the concern is. That's where the bullshit is. Now, DeSantis has said this bill is necessary to combat the influence of the Chinese Communist Party in Florida. But it's unlikely that this law will keep Floridians safe. In practice, the law codifies and expands housing discrimination against people of Asian descent, something expressly forbidden by the Fair Housing Act. It will also put a burden of suspicion on anyone with a name that sounds vaguely Asian, not to mention Russian, Iranian, Cuban, Venezuelan, or Syrian, perpetuating racist stereotypes even more. Under the law, people who are not U.S. citizens or permanent residents and whose domicile or permanent home is in China will be prohibited from purchasing property altogether. Okay. Just more xenophobia, guys. Good job, Florida man. Way to go. The sole exception is an incredibly narrow one. Quote, people with non-tourist visas or who have been granted asylum may purchase one residential party under 2 acres that is not within 5 miles of any military installation. So, in other words, political dissonance, you're okay, kind of. Everyone else, no. Yep, everybody else. Non-tourist visas or who have been granted, well, people with non-tourist visas. That's not as narrow as it sounds necessarily. I'd have to look into it more. Because non-tourist visas would include employment. Or it should. But the rest of this sounds very bad. So. People with non-tourist visas or who have been granted asylum may purchase one residential party under 2 acres that is not within 5 miles of any military installation. I don't know. It's still discriminatory. The reason it's still discriminatory here is because of what I'm about to say next. So this term is vaguely defined in law, but there are at least 21 large military bases in Florida, many of them within 5 miles of cities like Orlando, Miami, and Tampa, putting major residential and economically important areas completely off limits. That's the rub. So while the non-tourist visa sounds okay in theory, it is the restriction of it not being within 5 miles of any military installation that is the problem. 5 miles is pretty close. Like most cities are, if there's a military base in your city, chances are it's within 5 to about 10 miles or so of anywhere else in that city. So that's the problem. Now, Republicans, for their part, said the law will help protect the United States from countries of concern. But a number of advocacy groups say the law is discriminatory and are suing the state in federal court over the legislation, as they should. The Department of Justice supports this lawsuit, saying, quote, these unlawful provisions will cause serious harm to people simply because of their national origin. Contravene, okay. Quote, these unlawful provisions will cause serious harm to... Quote, these unlawful provisions will cause serious harm to people simply because of their national origin, contravene federal civil rights laws, and undermine constitutional rights, and will not advance the state's purported goal of increasing public safety. A federal judge heard arguments on Tuesday challenging the law. Politico reported this week that 12 Republican state attorney generals are asking the court to side with Florida. Again, rank partisanship. We need to stop this shit. Yes, Chinese citizens owning property while not living in the United States is a problem. There's a lot of foreign investment firms from China. That are buying up U.S. property to use as investment vehicles, because the U.S. housing market is bonkers when it comes to this. Second only, or I guess the only other one that's bonkers more so than the U.S. is, I think the U.K. is pretty bad with this too, with the housing market. And so it's an issue to allow foreign investment firms to own up large swaths of property. That is a concern. But targeting people that live in the United States from being able to buy property, to live in and own and integrate into society, to create the goodwill, to become part of the community in which they live, maybe forming a family, maybe even permanently leading to the things that create the reasons to seek permanent residency and citizenship, ultimately, for many of these people. You're stopping that from happening in the first place by preventing them from owning property, from owning a home, from being part of the community. All because your fear of Chinese investment firms, of Chinese spies. Come on, man. I thought we didn't like treating people differently based on their race, ethnicity, or country of origin. Wasn't that what the whole thing about affirmative action was? Or are we that xenophobic that we don't want people that are living, working within the United States from owning property? Especially in areas that are economically advantageous, where many of these people are going to work. Really? Are you going to let this happen? Come on. But with that, my friends, that concludes this segment of the News Roundup. Now, for people that do not know, we at the News Roundup...
This is a camera lucida. And for the whole of the 19...
So for people that may not know, we at the News Roundup like to end our news segments with some news of the weird. And this week, we are talking about an otter on a surfboard. So a cheeky sea otter commandeered a surfboard during Black Surf Santa Cruz 3rd Annual Liberation Paddle Out at Colwell Beach in Santa Cruz, California. Mark Woodward, who goes by the moniker at Native Santa Cruz on Twitter, told Storyful he was watching the Juneteenth weekend paddle out when he noticed that the sea otter checking out some surfboards. Let me say it again. Mark Woodward, who goes by the moniker at Native Santa Cruz on Twitter, told Storyful he was watching the Juneteenth weekend paddle out when he noticed the sea otter checking out some of the surfboards. Let's turn over to this cute little video of an otter now. I have it on mute because people like to play music and I don't want to get hit by the YouTube censors. Oh, look at that. It's so cute. Oh my goodness. It's just chilling otter. Chilling on the surfboard. Is it going to go surfing? Oh my goodness. Sea pupper. Cute. What a cute little sea pupper. But with that, my friends, I am sad to say that we are out of time. We know you liked what you heard because you stayed with us to the end, so please smash that like button for the algorithms. It really does help us out. If you want to hear anything on this program or want to get in touch with us for anything, there are numerous ways to do that. Again, join the Discord. It's the easiest way to get a hold of us. Find me on Discord. You can find me CSP Cypher pretty much everywhere. I'm in like 50 Discords, so just search for me. You'll find me, I'm sure, because I'm probably in a Discord you're in. But yeah, get a hold of me that way. Join our server though, because we are going to have events and things like that just on our Discord. We don't want to stream everything that we do. Sometimes we just want to talk to y'all. Maybe I'll play some video games or something. We can chill out, whatever. Just join the Discord. It's the way to do it. And you can also special thanks to our copy producer, our script writer, Nikki Adams, because without her, this wouldn't be as of a robust news roundup as I'm able to do. She does a lot of work, so special thanks to her. Godspeed, Nikki, appreciate you. And special thanks to our Facebook community and our Discord community. Yes, we do Facebook. I'm an elder millennial. Fight me over it. I don't care. But we get a lot of our news shares and interesting stories from both of these places. So thank you all for sharing fun, interesting tidbits of news with different things, because it helps us out and we like to share what y'all share and the like. So with that, everybody, as we say at Crowdsource Politics, keep your head up through the political storm.